My mother really wanted my brother and I to attend church so that we'd have some exposure to that connection that happens, that sense of lineage. I remember feeling just confused about how, if God is us, if we are God, if we are connected to God, then why would we not love everyone? When I turned 18, I wasn't home to go to church. And so out of respect, when I was home, I would go to church with my mom, but I knew that wasn't going to be my spiritual path. So I'm sort of reintroduced to this path of yoga, the path as a spiritual path, as a way of living, which that is the spiritual path I'm most drawn to. I'm here on purpose. My ancestors have very clearly given me an assignment to weave in this holistic way, to connect with spirit, to bring that into spaces.
Welcome to the Spacious Unknown. I'm your host, Kat BUCCIANTINI. This podcast is a place where stories of spiritual lives can be shared, especially those that are a little unconventional. Stories shaped by curiosity and doubt, tenderness and intuition, grief and joy, and the quiet practice of inner listening. Before we begin, a gentle note. Spirituality is alive and always unfolding. What you hear now is one moment in time, one expression of someone's path. I invite you to listen with grace, curiosity, and a tenderness that leaves room for nuance rather than neat conclusions. Today, I'm joined by Michelle, and I invite you to settle in as we explore the shape of her journey. If you've been feeling the pull to slow down, to listen more deeply, to make sense of where you are in your life, I want to invite you into something I'm offering this year. It's called Meeting Yourself in Every Season. It's a monthly retreat series where we explore the emotional and spiritual wisdom of the natural world and how it mirrors our own inner lives. Together, we'll move through the second half of the year, summer, autumn, and into winter, paying attention to things like fullness, ripening, release, anger, grief, and stillness. Each gathering includes guided reflection, embodied practices, and spacious conversation. There's no pressure to believe anything in particular, just a willingness to notice what's unfolding within you. You can come to one session or join the whole series. Wherever you enter, you will be welcomed. If this resonates, you can learn more and sign up through the Prairie Retreat using the links in the show notes. The earth is always speaking. This is an invitation to listen. Welcome, Michelle. Thank you so much for coming on. Why don't you let our listeners know a little bit about what your life looks like right now?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to be here. So my name is Michelle, and my pronouns are she and her. That is my dog Jasper barking in the background. That's how life is right now in this particular moment. I live on the ancestral land of the Catawba, Cherokee, Tutelo, Saponi, Occaneechi, and many other tribes in Winston Salem, North Carolina. It is a beautiful day today in Winston Salem, and life is full right now. I have a lot of different projects in process, which I imagine we'll talk some about, spirit and life and the structure of things. And I was able this morning, I'm a beekeeper, bee tender, and I was able to go into my hives this morning to check them out and see what's what and to feed some of the hives just coming into early spring. And it was nice to connect with them in that way. So that was a lovely way to begin my morning. That's the local life. That's what's happening right here, right now, today.
Are the bees waking up? They are here in Oregon.
Yeah, they've been active for a while now, actually. I have 4 hives, and 2 of the hives, well, 3 out of the 4 are robust, and 1 needs a new queen, and so I have to go get a new queen next week. But they're definitely awake. All of the buzzy pollinators are awake, the carpenter bees and bumblebees and butterflies, and they've been awake for a while.
Oh, welcome spring.
Indeed.
So I like to start with a little grounding and centering meditation to ground both of us and to also ground us in the space that we're in and to give our listeners a little bit of an idea of what your space looks like and feels like for you. And so they can kind of be in that space with you as much as that is possible on a audio podcast. If you're listening and it's safe for you to do so, then I invite you to close your eyes along with us. And we're just going to start by taking some deep cleansing breaths. I like to take those in through my nose, and then as I exhale through my mouth, just kind of letting everything relax and let go. So, Michelle, we're going to start with the air around you, what its temperature is, its humidity or dryness.
When you're right, when you asked about the air, I felt a breeze. It's probably about 70 degrees outside, and I have a door open to my screen porch so I can feel the flow of air, and the windows are open as well. And so it just felt like a cool kiss from the wind, really, as the breeze moved in, as you called in air.
Mm. So as you sit with that lovely kiss, I want you to notice what you can hear that the wind is bringing to your ears, both in the room you're in and outside of that wall.
I have a wind chime that I purchased at a metaphysical store in Portland. I lived there for a year. And I purchased this wind chime right after my father transitioned. And so I can hear it singing right now. And I also hear the birds. So birds chirping right now and talking. There are definitely robins and cardinals, and often there are grackles, boathouse grackles in our yard as well, and many other birds. So I can hear those sounds. And in the distance, I can hear, the whirring of cars on a main road that's near where I.
So just turning your attention to the places where your body touches the space around you, noticing the support beneath you, and knowing that it holds you up and supports you without you needing to do anything at all.
I am seated in a chair right now, and so just aware of my seat in the chair, the way the chair meets my seat and back body. And I also can feel my feet on the floor, on the ground, with some awareness of what exists below the surface that is visible to me, or this layer of earth and floor that is beneath me. So just present to the layers of support from the earth.
With your next in-breath, just notice what scents are lingering in the air that you can pick up.
Well, it's a little ways away from where I'm seated, but it's in the same room. I lit a beeswax candle right before I sat down for this conversation. So there's also some beeswax. Well, there's always beeswax in our house, but there's some beeswax frames because I just purchased more beeswax frames to add to the hives I have. So the house, there's this just sweet smell of beeswax that lingers in the air because there's a little bit more of it in our house right now. So I can definitely smell that.
As you follow your breath down a little ways, what do you notice about what tastes are lingering in the back of your throat, on your tongue, and your mouth?
I took a sip of coffee just a few moments ago, so I can taste that. And it's actually this newer coffee from the mountains of North Carolina, from about an hour and a half away from a small coffee shop and roaster. And so I can taste that. And I was just there. So the taste actually takes me back to the Blue Ridge Mountains, which I visited earlier this week.
So just following that breath all the way down into your lungs, allowing yourself to notice the ways that your body moves to accommodate it.
as you breathe in and out. And then turning inwards, I just invite you to notice where you're holding a place of stillness in your body today. It can be really small.
Often, I feel still or find stillness or return to it in my center or core. So, solar plexus and sacral chakra area and root. And in addition to that now, which is where I notice the stillness or centeredness, I'm aware of my feet and how grounded they feel, which also that feels like stillness to me.
Mm. So I just invite you to breathe into that stillness, allowing yourself to rest there for a little while. Before opening your eyes, I want you to imagine how you might do that, like a sunrise, just allowing a little bit of light kind of flutter in as you slowly have a slit open past your eyelashes, and then allowing them to rise slowly open, paying attention to what your eyes are picking up as you do so.
Well, I'm sitting in this is my office, but also sort of magical room. There are altars and various things in this space. Then there are windows, so I'm looking out. And so when I first opened my eyes, I noticed a lot of the trees have leafed out. So I just noticed the green, this light green. It's almost like a frog pond green. And then there's this goldish green color too, which is actually a tree in my neighbor's yard, but there are also trees all around me and then a dark green. So I noticed the foliage and the different shades of green and other colors. And the holly have a it's almost like a it feels like an energetic boundary of holly that I didn't plant. It was here because cars go up and down the road, and so there are lots of berries on it right now, and there are also flowers on it that have opened, and the bees love to pollinate the holly, and the robins love to eat the berries. So I'm seeing red and green and thinking about who will visit these various trees that I have named.
Mm. I don't know that I've ever seen a holly flower. What does the flower look like?
They're tiny white flowers, and they're green in the center, and this kind of holly blooms twice a year, so the bees forage for nectar from it, twice a year, which is quite lovely.
Oh, thank you. Oh, well, I like to start with hearing a little bit about what spirituality meant for you as a young person and how it's changed as you have grown into the person you are today. And so we'll just kind of start with a general, what are the things that stand out for you growing up that were important for your spiritual formation, and how has that evolved as you moved through life?
Yeah, this is a big question. I grew up in Virginia, and I grew up going to a Black Baptist church every Sunday, and it's called St. Peter's Baptist Church in Glen Allen, Virginia, and it's the church where my mother grew up, so she went to church there every Sunday and often to Bible study on Wednesdays. It's also the church where my grandmother, maternal great-grandmother, and other relatives and ancestors is where they went for worship too, and many other things. I mean, the church in the Black community, particularly in the South, as many people know, was and still serves as a hub for connection, for organizing, for community building, in addition to worship. And so all of that, I remember feeling those roots in my my blood lineage in that space, in that church, and also the other forms of ancestry just based on how much that structure, which changed over time actually, how much that structure held related to Blackness in the South. And the church being one of the safer places for Black folks to congregate together. And I remember the felt sense of that as a child. My mother really wanted my brother and I to attend church until we were 18 every Sunday so that we'd have some exposure to what I just named, that connection that happens, that sense of lineage, a sense of worthiness in a world and a culture where Blackness was not valued and in many ways still is not due to dominant cultural norms and structures such as white supremacy. And so I didn't understand that as a child, that that's why my mother wanted us to go to church, to to see people who looked like us, to see and experience pride, to feel that, to cultivate that, and to cultivate those connections and feel church, which and sanctuary, I would say, which isn't always it doesn't always happen within a physical structure, but to feel that sense of inner sanctuary and to tend our inner sanctuaries through connection and also collective sanctuary and building and resonance between one another. And so I grew up Christian and Baptist, and my favorite part of church was the singing, the vibration, the sound. I think that's where I felt much of what I've already named. On a cellular level, I could feel that through song and the emotion that song elicits. Often the choir would sing, and multiple times throughout a 2-hour service on a Sunday, and various people in the church would be moved by spirit through vibration and song. And the expression of that was rising up out of a seat and getting happy, which is what many Black folks call it, church folks call it, like overcome. And I witnessed my grandmother, this happened to my grandmother once. And I was very young and I wondered what was going on. And my mother later explained. And that's really there's an imprint of that memory of watching her and others so overcome by spirit through song and vibration and this experience and connection to something bigger, which my grandmother would call God. And what I call God, goddess, water, sun, moon, river, tree, honeybee, or the divine, right? Or mother, or Ma, or Durga, who is one of my Ishvaras from the Hindu pantheon. And so, and an Ishvaras is someone we develop a relationship with, an energy, an entity, a god or goddess, a deity that we bow to, that we pray to. So that's who Durga is for me. So I have all these different names, but the name that we used growing up was God. And I went to church until I was 18 and felt the things I named, and also felt a lot of I'm a curious person. I was a curious child. I was pensive. I was sensitive. I am empathic. I felt things very, very deeply. And at times in the structure of church and religion, I felt like there were contradictions and conflicts and mixed messages, I would say, that confused me and mainly made many questions arise for me. And some of this emerged from the minister sharing different messages about groups of people and what the Bible said and what might happen, and being God-fearing, which never resonated with me at all. And so I would and this effort to get to heaven and this binary of good and bad that never really landed well. And so church was this place of devotion and wholeness, in many ways, and also this place where I feel like through messaging, further fractures were created or confusion. I remember feeling just confused about how, if God is us, if we are God, if we are connected to God. I remember just this dynamic tension of, then why would we not love everyone? Like, why would we, you know, talk about certain people as if they're evil? And this was in my child body, so the world's complex and nuanced, and I think I understand a little more now than I did then, but I was curious about it. The other piece of this is, church is where I learned about devotion. It's where I learned about prayer. It's where I learned about ritual and ceremony and deep practice from my grandmother and my mother, and witnessing others and moving through rituals as well. That evolved over time because when I turned 18, I stopped. I went to college and then went to graduate school. And I was in college in Virginia and graduate school in North Carolina for social work. And so I wasn't home to go to church. And so out of respect, when I was home, I would go to church with my mom, but I knew like that wasn't going to be my spiritual path. And in graduate school, I was introduced, well, actually in college, I was introduced to yoga, although it was not shared as a spiritual path in college. And then in graduate school, I was sort of reintroduced to this path of yoga and the path as a spiritual path, as a way of living, which that is the spiritual path I'm most drawn to. In addition to Buddhism, although I'm not Buddhist, I am a yoga practitioner, a yoga teacher, a spiritual teacher. I would describe myself now as interspiritual. So I draw from a lot of different lineages and mythologies to support myself, I think, in my life, but also as I work with others one-to-one and in groups. And the space I've been most immersed in and the philosophy I've studied the most is based in yoga. I've also engaged in a lot of shamanic practice and work. Shamanism for me is about being able to, in some way, root into the earth and nature-based practices more and elemental energies. But it's also for me about one, altering their state of being enough. And this feels yogic to me too. It doesn't feel like a departure from astral travel or what we might do when we meditate or what we might do when we practice different pranayama breathing practices. Is the same to me. But the shamanic piece of this feels like altering oneself enough to, often I describe it as, gather information from other timelines, from other realms, to bring back here in this realm, the relative plane. And that happens through the drum beat is the way that happens the most for me and for many people, right? So through sound, but there are other ways that we can elicit this just out of the head space and more rooted into the different layers of who we are versus the density of our bodies, but to always come back, not to transcend what is here now and our incarnation and our human bodies now. So that's another shamanic work and practice, is something that is deeply integrated into my life, and also it's something I work with as I work with others who are on their own spiritual journeys and paths and trying to make meaning of this world. There's a lot more, but that's a long enough answer for now, probably.
Thank you. Yeah, I have questions. So, well, I'm going to start at the end and go backwards maybe. Can you share a little bit about, for those who only know yoga as a form of stretching or, intentional stretching even, can you share a little bit about the ways in which it is a spiritual practice for you and for others?
Yeah. My entry point to the spiritual, it is a spiritual pathway, but entry point to that, the understanding of it being something deeply spiritual versus exercise or asana, right? The different postures we might move through. My entry point was through the Yoga Sutras and a teacher who shared, which is a sacred text. There are many sacred texts. I work with the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita the most, but there are other texts we could draw from as well. And so upon someone sharing, oh, this is more than stretching, right? This is actually more than stretching mindfully and noticing what happens in the body. It's about many things, but it is about, this is how I frame it, connecting to the divinity or humanity is a word we could use within us and within all beings, not just human, but human and more than human. The pathway through these various, and they're different ways to practice, different lineages, but the pathway through various practices such as movement, such as meditation and mindfulness and working with the breath and observing these moral observances, which are often called the yamas and niyamas, which are about how do we treat ourselves? And we're in relationship with others. So how do we relate to others in the world and remember our interconnectedness? There are also these practices about drawing within to cultivate deeper concentration and single-pointed focus and meditation to reach a state of deeper consciousness. And so if for someone listening, yoga has been about stretching, one might think about how does that practice of stretching deepen consciousness? And often the question I ask people is about everything really is for the sake of what? Am I stretching to see how much my muscles can stretch? That's cool. There's learning in that. That's deeper consciousness. Am I stretching so I know where my limits are and boundaries are and can apply that in my life? That's deeper consciousness too. Am I stretching and do I notice how we are all being asked to stretch so deeply at this time on our planet? Deeper consciousness. So whatever it is, right? Am I sitting on my cushion to meditate or engaging in a walking meditation or listening to birdsong as my meditation? For what? Not productivity. That's not the framing I'm using. But it's this connection to something bigger. And that's how I think about yoga, that it's not, yoga in the West has been colonized and taken from source culture and commodified. And there's confusion about what yoga is. And so there's been a separation from spirit, I think, in that way because of the separation from source culture and misunderstanding and just how colonialism works, actually. This has happened to so many indigenous practices, right? And there's a reclamation of those practices. So I think we also need to understand the context in which we practice. And one way to think about this is to consider yoga as a way of living. So it's not just when I show up and stretch for 10 minutes, like it's how can I more deeply integrate it into my life as a way of being? That to me feels spiritual. So those are some of the ways I would invite people to think about it. It's an entire path. Often I call it an ancient technology. Like there's so many different ways to enter into it and it's brilliant in its design. And there's so many ways for yoga to work with us, for us to move into deeper alignment.
And do you have a personal experience that you can share of the way this has spiritually that you've noticed spiritual what it's done for you to be a yoga practitioner, yoga teacher, aware of this deeper history and cultural significance of the practice?
Often I mentioned a moment ago, like yoga working with us, right? And as a way of living and being, so we can transform. And so I'm thinking about, who first maybe sparked this thought for me or experience for me. And there are a few people who've done this. And one is Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, who I've practiced with and studied with and taught with several times. And I met her a long time ago. And before I actually wrote a book about yoga and social justice called Skill in Action. And before I wrote that book, I met Reverend Angel and went to a couple immersions. And before that, read about her. And at the time, I was really yearning for teachers who could contextualize the teachings to the now where we live. And she felt like that to me. And there's just a deep steadiness that I experience when I'm with her, and presence and like truth and a counter narrative that comes forth, meaning counter to dominant culture. And so I remember sitting in a space and understanding what was being shared with me was this other path, the third path or middle path, or another way to move, to be, another way to like experience teachings in a spiritual container and context, but also very much talking about like real world things, many of which are happening now. Polarization and divisiveness and oppression and organizing, right, to disrupt these systems that are toxic and in collapse in many ways. But there's a lot that falls apart now. And so that was definitely I would say a pivotal moment to be taught by her to sit in a space with others who were reckoning with, I would say, and like wrangling with the times and what was happening. And then in the collective soma, right? The body, this system. So there are others, but that is one of the sort of earliest experiences of like, I knew that yoga was a spiritual practice. I understood that it was something bigger, that there are parts of it I may never understand, the path of yoga. It's that vast. I knew that, and spiritual teachings had been shared with me from the path, and it felt deeply spiritual, like it was asking me to change and transform. And sometimes that's not easy. And then I feel like being with Reverend Angel grounded all of that. It was like, oh, right, this is very much connected to how we move in the world. It's not something I go attend and then leave, because I can't leave. I'm here in a body. I can't leave this, or I don't want to, actually. I mean, we could, but that's not my journey. So I'm not choosing to leave. So if I'm going to stay, what kind of practice will hold me that will remind me of my divinity and humanity as I stay in this body during times that feel deeply uncomfortable?
Mhm. And I have a couple of, yeah, I want to know a little bit more about when you use the word spirituality, what does that mean for you? How would you define that for yourself?
It feels like sometimes, words are limiting, even though I use a lot of words. So what first came to me is the vibration of the honeybees, the hum that they make that we might be familiar with, particularly when they're calm. And it's a frequency that can calm us as well. And then it changes if there's agitation or disruption, which I experienced this morning when I was in my hives. And so that's the sound that came to me when I heard your question about what is spirituality. It's this frequency that I understand through the honeybees and other parts of the more than human world, but I can hear them, that mirrors a frequency that resides within me. And so spirituality feels like deep connection to me. It feels like resonance. It feels cosmic. It feels rooted in earth. I'm thinking about the bees and the way they work here and in other realms. It feels here in my heart, in my body, feet on the ground, and also this connection to the cosmos and ethereal realm and the heavens. If spirituality for me is connected to something bigger than me, so often I talk about it as the great mystery, or the darkness, or the cosmos, what I can feel, but may not be able to see. But sometimes what I see, this happens to me in the more than human world all the time, experiences in nature. I feel like so many parts of the great mystery have been revealed to me through a connection to nature and getting quiet enough to listen. And there's this reminder in the more than human world, which feels connected to spirituality, of the natural order of things, of balance, of returning to a place of peace and balance within me, if that's even possible, and certainly working to cultivate that in the world in some way, given my connection to all things, which takes me back to the hum and resonance and that frequency that I hear when I sit next to my honeybee hives. Spirituality also feels rooted in lineage and devotion and philosophy. I mentioned some yoga philosophy or sacred texts. There's some like wisdom that has been passed down through spoken word, story, mythology, and various writings about a code of, I'm going to say ethics. That may not be the right word for what I describe right now, but that's the word that comes to me. If we think about different lineages, religions, structures where people go and practice connected to specific geographies, specific gods and goddesses, right? There's some sort of book that we go to understand what is this spiritual practice. So that also comes to mind for me as I think about spirituality, that there's study, that there's an attainment of knowledge. And for me, there's an attainment of knowledge and also how do we live our spirituality? How do we express it? How do we show it? How does it shape us? How does it change us? So there's action that's connected to this attainment of wisdom and knowledge. And this shift that can happen on every level, like, physically and emotionally and mentally and cellularly, and this integration of knowledge and change as a result of engaging in a moving along a spiritual path. So that's what comes to me when I think about spirituality.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate that you've combined this experiential sense of it that's felt, but it's also learning. There's also wisdom that has been distilled through generations and communities and cultures that we can we can tap into and become a part of respectfully. And yeah, and that's all part of spirituality for you.
Yeah. Yes, all of it. Yeah, it feels textured in that way. There's a lot of texture to it. There's a lot of thinking back to the centering meditation you led at the beginning, right? And the description of that. That's how I feel like I've answered most of the questions, but answered this question about spirituality. It's bringing in various senses to try to describe something that can be difficult, I think, to describe with words.
Yeah, and the words diminish it. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, you can't. I keep coming up against that. The words diminish it. You can only make it less by explaining it more.
Yeah.
Yeah. You brought up a lot of times this idea of community and spirituality and the way those are connected for you. Growing up in the Black Baptist Church and the importance of community there for you as a Black woman and in personhood in this country that we live in that is far from equal or fair to people. And then the communities that you have been a part of as you have learned yoga and that community. And you've mentioned sacred activism. So I want to hear a little bit more about the ways in which community is sacred for you, why that's important for your spirituality, and how that informs this concept of sacred activism for you.
Yeah. Thanks for this question. I feel like it's not a feeling, it's actually a knowing. My orientation to the world, and it makes me think of how honeybees work as a collective, is much more about unity consciousness and interconnectedness than individualism. And that's my conditioning. That's how I've been shaped. That's how my family raised me. That is, I think, connected to Blackness too, and lineage, and the ways that any group who's marginalized or experienced marginalization, like, we have to take care of each other. And so if I'm just out for myself, I'm not going to survive. That's true for everyone, actually, but we're conditioned in different ways, and there are a lot of different influences that shape us and our thinking, and then some unlearning often that has to happen. So when I think about community and the importance of it, it's just who I am. Like, it's just how I show up and move in the world. It doesn't always look the same, but it's my view. That's my perspective. That's my lens. And I think that has, in so many ways, I'm grateful. I mean, my mother has a lot to do with this. She was a special education teacher for 32 years, and I was in her classroom a fair amount, helping at various points during summer break or different times, helping out and just observing. And she made such an impression on me and how devoted she was to the children that she interacted with that were in her classroom, children that other teachers didn't want to teach, children that were, I mean, basically seen as like disposable, and their families too. And I saw her practice collective care all the time. That was her orientation was, if they don't have money for the field trip, we didn't grow up with money, but she's going to figure out how to pay for the field trip or get them on the field trip. If they didn't have food, she was going to figure it out. If they missed the bus, she was going to bring them home. They were going to eat dinner with us, and then she was going to take them home. And those are just a few examples. I mean, there are thousands of examples of where she was of service. Her pathway is generosity and service. and a disbelief in scarcity, right? Even though we had limited financial resources, we had a lot of other resources which feel connected to spirit and like her own spirit and the way she wanted to move in the world and the world she wanted to live in and create. And so I feel like that is where I first witnessed this practice of community, collective care. Like this is just what we do for each other. And we don't complain, we just do it. This is just who we are. And I have my grandmother. There are a lot of other women in particular in my family who have shown me this way and who have inspired me to be in community in these ways. And the way that this links to sacred activism for me is, we don't in the ways we've already named, we don't exist in a vacuum. Everyone is having some experience of what falls apart now on our planet. There may be very disparate experiences and people have different opinions about them and perspectives and their own shaping about what happens right now, if there's even an awareness of it. But in my experience in my body, we are living through a time that feels so, as I said, uncomfortable, but deeply intense. And there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of like, what is going on and what do we do? And it just is amplified in this way I've never experienced before. And I am a facilitator. I hold space all the time. The reactivity is right on the surface now in a way that I didn't experience a decade ago in groups. Or 20 years ago, certainly. I mean, we're still reactive, but this is right. It comes in the door. It's right there fresh. There's a frenzy, there's activation, there's what's happening, what are we going to do? There's mindlessness, I would say. There's distraction, there's overwhelm, there's dysregulation. Everyone is experiencing, I think, these things I just named in some way. And then how that manifests, though, may be different, and what we do in response may be different. What I've experienced in some spiritual spaces is a lot of spiritual bypassing of what falls apart, of the uncertainty, of the why, of the reality is we have this experience, there are structures in place, things are not equal, they're not fair. These systems are working in concert with one another to only uphold a small group of people and to uphold a hierarchy of body. That is my perspective on part of what's happening, and there's eco death happening too, all at the same time, and all the other things I haven't named that people are probably present to, aware of, and impacted by right now. Wars, genocides, like there's a lot going on. And in spiritual spaces, one-to-one and in groups, sometimes I've experienced this separation from the relative plane. We are humans on the planet experiencing these things I just named. And yet, because we're in the sanctuary, we can't talk about it. Or because an individual has shown up as a seeker who works with me, I can't have this framing in my mind, even if I never bring it up. Like, I feel like there is some information missing about what it means to be alive right now and work with spirit and work with seekers who are interested in trying to understand what is going on and what it means for them, but also what it means for us. And so to me, sacred activism is bringing the material of what is happening here on earth in this plane. It's not the only thing happening, what I just named. We bring in resilience, we bring in beauty, we bring in the more than human world, we bring in the hum and that frequency. We bring in all of those asset-based strengthening tools as well. No one's neutral. And so I think as I've thought about this just as a human, I've thought about it as a social worker, and now as a spiritual director, companion, guide, I'm in deep inquiry about how do we equip ourselves to be able to be present to and with all that happens and how that influences an individual's experience, and how do we talk about it? And then also, how do we get out in our communities, right? And how do we broaden our frame enough to know that our spiritual spaces are not absent of so many of the things that have led to the collapse that we experience now. So some of it's talking about it, but more of it for me is like, when I sit with somebody, I want to understand that whatever they're saying to me is not separate from what is happening in the world. I just want to know that, whether or not we end up talking about that. I want to know that because it will influence how I listen to them and also what I might offer as support.
Mm-hmm. And so as you look at the ways in which you are able to live in a more holistic way that weaves in all of the things happening in the physical, psychological, spiritual parts of the world, how do you do that without losing yourself? How do you hold everything and still continue going?
Yeah. People ask me this question all the time. There's one other thing I want to say about the sacred activism piece, which doesn't feel separate from the answer I'll give you to the question you just asked. But because I mainly was talking about in spiritual spaces, I've been in a lot of organizing and activist spaces where people don't have ritual and ceremony and spiritual practice and expect to stay grounded and centered as they organize and disrupt systems. That's impossible. We have to have some sort of practice, ritual, connection to something bigger, be that spirit or something else, to ground us enough to stay present and to contemplate what we might do in response to what happens now. So for me, that's the answer. I have to have a practice, and I have many practices. So I'm just using that as this one word, but I have many practices that resource me, that allow me to touch into the part of myself that is unwavering, the part of me that understands that we actually there's another way. We, collapse happens and death happens. It happens in nature all the time. What happens now, though, when I think about humanity and our relationship with the earth too, is this unnatural death. It's like this, a nature season shift. There is a death that happens, right? There's a whole ecosystem. We're a part of it. Death happens in the context of the ecosystem and the order of things too, as does birth, right? Or rebirth or creation. But the way it is happening now feels very misaligned with nature. I feel like I have so many practices that help me, as I said, touch into that unwavering part, that steady part, that still part, and so many practices that help direct me toward a response to, not with urgency, but a response, like I'm alive now. So what do I do at this time, given that I'm alive on the planet? Is a question I ask myself a lot, and a question that emerges in meditation for me, and a question that points me back to, like, I'm here on purpose. And my ancestors have very clearly given me an assignment to do these things that we've been talking about, to weave in this holistic way, to connect with spirit, to bring that into spaces, to invite people to transform and get closer to this other way that is not unnatural and misaligned with the laws of nature. So I do all sorts of things to ground in myself in this body. Even as I shamanically journey and go other places, I always come back because I have an assignment to do. It has shifted or evolved, but I'm clear, which makes me feel tethered in a good way, in a grounded way, to community, to the earth, to God, goddess. There's work to do. There are things to do. Without practice, I wouldn't be able to do these things with such clarity. And what people might say at times is grace.
Hmm. And so walk me through some of those practices. You've mentioned that you have a lot, and you've said a few things here and there that are part of it, but what is a typical day of practice? Where do your practices, or where are they incorporated? How do you walk through the day with those in your heart?
Often I begin my day, my stepdaughter said this to me the other day. She said, "You wake up to move slowly. You wake up so you can actually then have hours in the morning." If I don't always have hours, but usually there's an hour there. Sometimes I have a little more time. And I thought it was a funny observation that she made. She wakes up and is getting ready for school. And I'm waking up and lighting in a candle and going to sit on my cushion in front of my altar and meditating to turn inward and be intentional and reconnect. So there's a ritual of that every morning, of some sort of meditation centering, connecting with my Ishvara, Durga, and deities on my altar, I also, multiple times a day, connect with the more than human world. And so sometimes earlier I mentioned the trees, it's looking out the window, but I have a dog, Jasper, and often it's taking Jasper outside to walk him. And in the morning, what I notice, it's a mindful, way to move. I observe everything that comes alive, right? Like the crows, and I'll talk to the crows, and the all the other birds in our yard as well that I mentioned earlier, and the geese, and there's water and just a lake, a loch in our neighborhood. So seeing who's out there and just noticing the sunlight on it or the sunrise, feeling the air, the quality of the air, how it feels different, the temperature versus later in the day, for example, noticing the clouds, noticing the sky, seeing if there are passerbys that are human. That kind of thing feels like a practice that reminds me I'm in connection with all of this beauty. Amid all of the ugly in the world, there's life, beauty, communication happening from the more than human world that we are a part of. So that's a practice. I also chant and play harmonium and chant different mantras. And sometimes that chanting is through a japa meditation where I use a mala and invoke a mantra to a specific deity or to call in some specific energy. I also, when I'm home, I travel a lot, but when I'm home, I visit my honeybees every day. I sit with them and I listen and I watch them do what they do. I practice movement in my body in various ways. I mentioned walking, but also moving through different postures, moving slowly, moving faster. And a lot of my practices are so earth-based. It's spring, so I'm thinking about gardening. Like I love to garden and grow food, and challenge myself every season, every year during this season, spring and summer, and also now fall, to like grow more food. So I've been planting my garden, and that's a practice, like this mindful way of thinking about how to maximize the space and grow food to sustain us and to sustain others in our community. A practice that I recognize, right? Some people don't have honeybees or a garden or can't go outside. I understand that. And so there are other ways we can connect, looking at a plant in our space, a living creature in our space, and noticing that and breathing with that. We can you guided so much of this at the beginning, and notice our connection to the earth and notice our connection to the sky. We can sit for a minute. We can sit for 5 minutes. Maybe we have longer to sit. We can light a candle or imagine a flame in our mind's eye and focus our attention there. These are all practices I do, but I'm also naming them because they might be more accessible to people. We can look at an image of beauty, right, on our phone or computer or in a book. We can use a book as a meditation, opening to a page, seeing where we land as a divination tool, which is the other part of my practices. I have a lot of different divination tools, oracle decks, pendulums that I use to ask questions or gather information. So I'm just naming a lot of the ones that I engage these practices. Prayer, I pray every morning as well. And I also have an ancestor altar, and I make offerings to the ancestor altar inside. And I have a tree in the backyard, which feels connected to my maternal grandmother, that I make offerings to. And that's where Mary Magdalene is. And I make offerings to her as well. So those are big practices for me that are almost daily.
Yeah. Yeah. And just listening to this and thinking of some of the activist circles I've been a part of and how easily people would get burned out, in part because we weren't doing it in a way that was sustainable. We weren't taking that time for ourselves to allow our spirit to renew and regenerate. And it just sounds like you've really got that dialed in where you do that pretty regularly, and that helps nourish your spirit. And is that simply how you were raised, or was there a point in which you were like, I am enough and I need to do this in order to continue being enough, or for these places that I want to stand up and make my voice heard, or these people that I want to serve or help?
Yeah, I think both. I mentioned devotion earlier and witnessing my grandmother. My grandmother actually had a ritual every morning where she would read the devotional, the Bible, and she would drink her coffee. I wrote a story about her. I have a book coming out in September, and the introduction is about this ritual for her. And she did it every morning that I was there. She did it. I think she did it every morning. And I remember watching and not really knowing what is that? What is she doing? But I knew it was important. And then later sort of realized, oh, she does this to prepare herself. There's no way she can face anything in the day that she might encounter without this ritual. And I'm thinking about it now smiling because I feel like that's where I learned how to sit on my cushion and pray and light a candle and pull a tarot card or whatever it's from watching her do that and seeing how it nourished her. She did other things too, but that was daily. She did nothing else. That was going to happen every day. And she read her Bible every night. I have her Bible. I got it when she transitioned, and it has her thumbprints on it, which I love. I know she opened the Bible in a particular way with her thumb, and she turned to a page, and so those practices bookended her day. That's where I think I learned this. You need to have something to prepare your vessel, your body, your channel to go out in the world or to just relate with people in your house. Like, you need something, even if it's 5 minutes, to center yourself. And then there was an experience I had when I lost a colleague. Her name's Cynthia Brown. She transitioned in 2016. She had pancreatic cancer. And there's a whole story around that. But the night she transitioned, I had taught all day and I had the choice to go to the hospital or go home. I went home and sat in front of my altar and held space for her transition that way. And I remember saying to myself, because Cynthia's framing she was an anti-racism trainer, she was a beloved, a community member, a community activist, and her framing when she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer was white supremacy gave this to me, and I have to contend with white supremacy to try to heal cancer, and which is impossible, actually, to try to get care. That's impossible. And so I had that. She said that to me one day, and that night of her transition sat and just said, I mean, what I said out loud is white supremacy might kill me, right? What manifests from it might get me too, but I'm going to do whatever I can do to prevent that from happening. And that was I have to care for myself so very deeply because I'm precious. My life is precious, not more precious than anyone else's, but I'm in this vessel. And if I don't tend to it, then so much could happen that I don't want. And so I'm not saying that's why Cynthia got cancer. What I am saying is there was a really clear call, and she was the second colleague that I lost from cancer who was part of this collective of anti-racism trainers and activists. And I was like, nope, I'm setting boundaries. I'm not going to do it this way. Work is not going to kill me. And it wasn't before, but there was a big shift, a big reclamation of this body, this life, my personhood, who I am in the world, and I will nurture and care for myself, not at the expense of others, but as a practice of collective care so I can go out in the world and nurture others and nourish others and hold space for change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important. The sense of I cannot do what I am meant to do unless I also care for myself. I'm curious, I love asking this question and whatever you're comfortable sharing, but thinking back throughout your life, from childhood till now, by yourself with community, can you think of some times or share some times when you had a transcendental experience, as experience of awe, that one of those moments where you just feel that mystery, that great mystery?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things coming, but one is what I mentioned about my grandmother earlier when she got happy in church. I would say that made me so curious. So there was wonder there, like, well, what is that? Do I feel that? There was a like, how does one access that? Even in my mom's explanation about like spirit, that's what moves through. And that's probably the earliest memory of this, not through my felt sense as a child, but through my grandmother, who was connected to me, watching her and be like, oh, there is something bigger and she can feel it. How do we get there? And then as a child, I was kind of laughing because I was really serious as a child and contemplative in a lot of ways, and also kind of like no bullshit. What are we doing, people? Are we doing this? Okay, we're doing this. All right, I'll play along. I remember feeling that a lot. And so much so that in school pictures, I would not smile in none of the school pictures, first through 8th grade. I think I started to smile in 9th or 10th grade in these pictures. And I would say to my mom, "Oh, it was raining." And she would know it hadn't rained that day that I had school pictures because she got my hair done and put a dress on or whatever she did. She knew. But every time I would say that, and I remember feeling like they're capturing a moment in time when the world is a mess. I don't understand how this like I'm smiling is going to it doesn't match what's going on, people. Can we talk about what's going on? So I just named that because I was that kind of kid. More internally, but you're I thought of that image, or I saw the image of myself in one of these pictures not smiling and being like, this is bull. Like I don't get this. And at the same time as a child, I found four-leaf clovers all of the time, which I still find. I found hearts in nature, which I still find all of the time. And I understood there was a communication between something bigger than me and me that came in the form of nature often, but hearts and four-leaf clovers very specifically, that there was this communion and connection that didn't feel human to me. It felt spiritual, although I wouldn't have used that word as a child. It felt like somebody's watching out for me. Somebody's bringing these four-leaf clovers. My friends don't ever find them. Like, someone look at that heart in the sunlight. People are like, I can't see it, but I could see it. And I think those were like experiences of wonder and awe for me as a child. With this, in contrast to this, or it's not even in contrast. There's something more to do here, people. Can we talk about the real stuff? And something holds me. Something's there. There's some other plane of experience that happens. And it's communicating with me in this way while we're running around not talking about the things I think we need to talk about, right? Like, I felt both of those in my body. And then I remember, I mean, I was a young adult at this point, but I remember being I have a lot of adult experiences of wonder and awe, very much connected to mystery and spirit and using those words. But I remember being in a meditation where someone played. So sound is really important to me, and I mentioned that through song and the honeybees and vibration. So I'm not surprised, but someone played the tongue drum during this meditation, and it is the one time I feel like I experienced samadhi or bliss for maybe 5 seconds, where I felt a connection to everything. I could hear the birds outside of the room we were in. I could feel the sunlight even though we were inside. I could feel the breeze. We were inside. I could feel my body. I could feel everyone in this space. I could feel the tongue drum as part of me. And I was like, oh, this is pure consciousness. This is what this feels like. This is it. It was very vivid. That was probably the most vivid experience of in young adult life of wonder and awe and connection to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Luckily, I have had similar experiences with in some of the Buddhist practices of. I went to a retreat once and we just hummed or sung the vowels, and it was just that resonance with everyone singing. I mean, it was incredible. It really does something to your system to be in that kind of space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That can be felt. After y'all were in that space, if other folks came into that space, right, they could probably feel the resonance of I think about that with the honeybees and the hum and hives that I've lost, and the wood, how they've hummed in those wood boxes for years and vibrated in these and how that's changed the frequency and quality of the wood in a way, and how another hive might feel that. I just think that happens through chanting too. You can, even when everyone's finished singing, right? We can still hear the sound. I've had that experience where it's like, oh, it's still here, still here. So yeah.
When you walk into those places, any place of worship that I've ever walked into you can feel it. It feels like I don't have to be from that particular tradition, but just walking into a place where people have been intentionally being with that unknown, whatever it is for them, and taking that time to really notice it and notice themselves in that space and in relationship with each other and with it. Yeah, you can feel it when you walk into those spaces. So I agree. I think it stays. It stays for a long time. I have this dream of making one of those, I don't know if you've seen them, the honeybee huts where you can sit in it and the bees are like kept underneath, and so you can hear. Oh, that sounds so lovely.
I really want one. I really want one because it's the sound. It's also the propolis, which is tree resin mixed with enzymes. They seal the hive with that. It smells really sweet. It's deeply protective, so you can smell. It's like it engages, those huts engage so many different senses for us. And our association with honey and sweetness, and that sort of taste and smell of it, because you can also smell when they transform nectar into honey, or when they're making bee bread, it smells a little like fermentation and it's sweet. And I really want one so that I can heal in that way and also invite others to be part of that too.
Yeah, it's a dream. I will build one. I'm convinced. My husband isn't as excited about bees as I am, but yeah, I think we're gonna wrap up in a little bit, but I wanted to give some space for anything before I ask my last question. Just give some space for anything else that you want to share or feel like would be important to talk about what for you in this moment in your life. And
Well, there are two things. And one is, I mentioned my grandmother and my mother earlier, and my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's probably about 10 months ago. And that coincided with, I was already in the Spiritual Guidance Training Institute's program, but this journey with my mom sort of coincided with much of that program and my journey through that, and just exposure to different spiritual teachings and lineages and teachers. And we talked about sacred activism and spirit and activist spaces, and also activism in spiritual spaces, and caring for ourselves. And I, as a person who is caring for my mother, I am very present to the need for us, anyone and everyone, and specifically caregivers, to have spiritual practices to support them, because it is brutal. This journey is brutal. It is unrelenting and brutal. I talked about yoga, how it has transformed me and asks me to change. It feels like this journey with my mom and with Alzheimer's really is this other evolution of spiritual path. And I'm not clear about all the ways that, or how to articulate that, because I'm just in the throes of the brutality of it. And it feels spiritual. It's kind of like I'm perimenopausal. It's kind of like how perimenopause is spiritual. I think it doesn't feel good at all, but there's some spiritual teaching in this transformation.
something's breaking open. But
So I'll just mention that to people, of that's present, that's going on. Yeah. And what it is like to witness someone move through forgetting parts of who they are, and try and to witness. I'm just thinking about my journey as a spiritual companion, and how I'm companioning my mother through this in a lot of ways, although she feels very different to me now, given her cognitive decline, but how she has been so deeply devotional and prayed and done all these things, and is trying to understand why this has happened to her. So I'm just very, and for me, I mean, I'm in it with her, but I'm also thinking about the world, how are these things happening? Again, because my orientation is the collective. So I'm in it very personally and also in it very collectively, this trying to make meaning of what this is. So I just offer that to people to know that is part of my journey. And my practices not only resource me to show up and do what I do in the world, but they also resource me to show up and to try to be as loving and compassionate to my mother and to myself as possible, which it's not always easy. But I know spiritual practice has in a lot of ways prepared me for this personal experience of this. And then the only other thing I want to mention, which feels related to that is and practice is I have a book coming out in September called You Are Protected, Invoking Spiritual Practices to Sustain Your Energy. It has a lot to do with what we talked about today, actually. But it came from so much of the content of this conversation, like so much of the content of this conversation relates to You Are Protected in that it came from those moments of like, you have to care for and tend to yourself, particularly if, and this is for anyone who holds any kind of change work. It doesn't have to be activist work or they don't have to identify as that, but it's like, if we work with the earth, if we work one-to-one, if we work with energy, if we work with groups, what do we do? It's my grandmother's ritual of drinking her coffee in the daily devotional, reading that. Like, what do we do to take care of ourselves and these vessels that we live inside and create from and mourn in and all the things we do in our bodies? Like, what do we do and to build up our reserves and resources? And it draws on elemental energy and archetypes and saints and deities and animal energies and natural curios. So it feels like a culmination of life, really, all of these different things I've done in this one book and body of work and these resources to help us journey through this moment and this time.
Mm. And the last thing that I like to do is just leave our listeners with something to savor. And it can be something that's been true for you, that has helped you remember who you are and what you are, or has helped you recenter or ground. Just anything that has been a natural, doesn't need to be terribly profound. It can just be just something that they can take with them.
May sweetness always find you. That's what's present now. May sweetness always find you. It is a place that I return to, given how serious I can be and the what a deep feeler I am, and like thinking about honey now or something sweet we might taste, and to invite in that sweetness in a myriad of ways, but to remember that we deserve sweetness too, particularly during harsh times, but we always deserve it. It's available in these different ways. So just invite it to always find us.
If something in this story spoke to you, you can find ways to engage more deeply with our guests' work through the links connected to this episode. The Spacious Unknown is a living, shared space, and I encourage you to consider adding your voice to the conversation. If you feel the pull to share your own unfolding story, follow the Share Your Story link in the show notes. If you're feeling drawn to explore your own spiritual life more deeply, I've also included information about spiritual companioning. The Spacious Unknown is part of Unfurl, my publication on Substack, and is produced by Embodied Conversations, LLC. Thank you for being here and for listening with care. Until next time, may you keep listening for what is true as you move through the wide and spacious unknown.